Welcome to the Active Marketer Podcast, where we talk about how to design, automate, and scale your business to the next level using sales and marketing automation. You can find out all the tips, tactics, and techniques you need to get more customers and sell more stuff over at theactivemarketer.com. Now, here's your host, Barry Moore.
Welcome back to part 3 of our Generating Online Income mini-series. You might want to go back and listen to the first 2 if you haven't done that already. In the first episode, we talked about some of the elements you need to have in place to generate some online income. In episode 2, we talked about some of the back-end systems you're going to need. And in this episode, we welcome back a previous guest, Dan Norris, author of the Sevenday Startup, a great book which is essentially a blueprint for how you can get up and running with an online business quickly. So sit back and enjoy this final part in our 3-part mini-series with Dan Norris. All right, I want to welcome back to the show Mr. Dan Norris, previous guest on episode 3 and episode 32, if you want to go back and check those out. And if you're listening in the future, the world is in the grips of the corona apocalypse at the moment, and everyone's quarantined down, maybe not going to work, might have lost their job, might have been laid off or whatever, and they're looking for a bit of a pivot, looking for where that next paycheck's coming from and where that next mortgage payment's coming from. So if you're sitting in quarantine and you've got time on your hands, now's the time to look at getting rid of that single source dependence and starting your own online business. And nobody better to talk to, in my opinion, than Mr. Dan Norris. Dan, how are you, brother?
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Right. So when I started my online business, I don't know how many years ago it is now. It seems like decades. But your book, 7-Day Startup, was really kind of instrumental in opening my eyes to a lot of things in creating what I call the magic of momentum. You know, a lot of people want to talk about stuff but don't want to take action. And your book is nothing but action. So for all those people who might be struggling and might be looking to diversify, get into an online business, start something new, I thought we'd get you back on and talk about the 7-Day Startup, because that's a pretty evergreen book. And for anybody who wants to go and grab that book, you can find it on Audible, Amazon.com, etc. But let's talk about it for a little bit. Let's talk about the genesis of what led to that book. I remember I started following you kind of in the informally days when you were putting out some killer content all the time. So you just want to give the listener kind of a brief history of the genesis of the 7-Day Startup?
Yeah, it's funny because I haven't really thought about this very much at all for a long time, because my business now is so totally different to what it was then, that it's kind of relevant to me anymore. I'm running what you would probably describe as a pretty traditional business in a brewery. But yeah, back then I just wanted to be a software entrepreneur. I kind of still do, but I've just never been able to. And so yeah, I built an app. It wasn't going very well, and then I was kind of desperate at the end of that. And instead of working away on something for another year, which I had done previously, I just launched something super quick, and just sort of realized at the time I was doing it that I was building a business in 7 days, and it was a catchy title, and I turned it into a book. And yeah, I think a lot of people around the time needed something like that, and that the book was reasonably successful, and a lot of other people read it and kind of tried to do the same thing. And if not start a business in 7 days, then just use some of the principles of, you know, testing things quickly and, you know, getting up a minimum viable product, and, you know, killing ideas that weren't working a bit quicker. That was a big part of it as well. And yeah, just taking action as opposed to just sitting on an idea for a long time.
Yeah, it's a great story. And I think for those people who aren't familiar with it, you were working informally, as you said, and you know that wasn't going the way you wanted it to. And you were basically running out of money pretty quick, and you need to come up with an idea or go back to working 9 to 5 kind of job. And so you didn't have much runway left as far as money, and so you had to iterate and come up with something quick that was going to do it. And that became WP Curve, which was a very successful business that you eventually sold to GoDaddy, down the track. So for those people who say, you can't start a business that quickly, well, clearly that's not true because you you have, and people do it. People do it frequently. So let's kind of give the listener a bit of an idea of kind of the methodology behind that. You talk about kind of three key concepts in the book. The idea, the execution, and the hustle.
Yeah.
So I guess if you're gonna come up with a business in 7 days, the idea is pretty crucial. What are some key elements of brainstorming that idea, and what are the kind of the key criteria of what is a good idea versus kind of what's kind of a shit idea?
Yeah, well, I think these things change a lot as you find yourself in different positions as an entrepreneur. Like back then, my idea of a good business to start in 7 days was something that could be scalable, but also something that was cheap and easy to start. And that rules out a lot of different businesses. So it rules out any kind of local business, rules out basically any kind of technology company or startup in the traditional sense. And what you're left with in a lot of cases, was a productized service, was sort of like the best of both worlds, I thought, or arguably the worst of both worlds, but something that potentially could scale, not to the extent of a software app. It's always much harder to scale a services business than a software business, but potentially can scale if you build it the right way, but also can be started very quickly. So I started that WordPress support business with one developer who I've just actually worked with in the last week on another idea randomly. But he was the one guy I had, and I was able to start it basically overnight because it was an easy business to start, and then we were able to grow it to whatever it ended up being, $1 million a year, like a decent company. And so, yeah, but these days I'm in a very different position. The business I'm in there is in no way a 7-day startup. It's taken us 5 years to get to where we are now. And it's still barely profitable. So I'm in a totally different place as an entrepreneur, but hopefully the listeners in the place where they want to build something quickly in the 7-day startup ideas can be useful to them.
Yeah, for sure. And so, what would be your advice for them to generate an idea? Because that's probably the thing that holds most people back. They go, I don't have anything to sell, or I don't have an idea, or I don't know where to start. And yeah. I think that's where they get hung up the most, I think, is that on that idea phase.
Well, I think you got to, I guess the point of the book is that it's okay to get hung up on different ideas and have lots of different ideas, but don't get hung up on trying to work out if it's a good idea when you can easily test that. That's the big point of that section, is like, is a monthly support service for WordPress a good idea? I don't know. And none of my friends knew either. Most people seem to think it was a bad idea, that it wouldn't work. But I figured it was an easy thing to test. I can just put up a landing page. I can build a WordPress page in 2 minutes, put a PayPal button on it, which is what I did. And I can send people an email and ask if they want to sign up, and then figure out how to manage it later. And that was all perfectly testable, and without much effort at all, I could work out if it was a good idea. And alternatively, you could sit around and debate it for weeks and weeks, and then come up with other ideas and tweak it and perfect it, and then end up not launching anything, or end up launching something that's not working and not bothering to test or read the data that it's not working, and just sticking on a shitty idea for 12 months. And I guess the other thing that with ideas is, like, in some cases the same idea will be great, and in other cases the same idea will be really bad. Like, for every Facebook, there's a competitor who had exactly the same idea that lost all of their money, either quickly or slowly. But just about every single one of the people that built something similar to Facebook is now out of business. So was it a good idea, or was it a bad idea? I mean, it's got a lot to do with timing and luck, and it's more about whether you can make this idea work as opposed to whether something is a good idea. But I think if you're looking at ideas and trying to determine, what's worth testing, because you're not going to know if it's a good idea or not until you ask someone to pay for it. But if you're looking to determine what's worth testing, the big thing I would look at is whether people are paying for a solution to this problem already. And if they're not, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to build a business quickly around this idea. If they are paying for something already, and it's a matter of them changing who they're paying to you as opposed to someone else, or tweaking the way they manage those payments, then sweet. But if they're not paying for it already and you're going to try and change their behavior as a consumer to pay for something that they never paid for before, then that's going to be extremely difficult and it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, I think there's a couple key concepts there. Yeah, you want to sell them something that they're already buying, so you don't have to educate them as to why they have a need for that particular thing, right?
Yeah,
so,
and it's not just a need; it's a desire to pay money. Like I've got a lot of need for lots of different things, and I will tell you that I'll pay money on all of these things, and that's great. But will I actually pay money for? Like, what things do I actually pay money for? You know, like especially a monthly subscription. Like if I think of the monthly subscriptions that I pay money for, they're all very, very critical things, you know, other than like home entertainment and stuff. Like for business, it's apps we can't live without, and it's services that we can't do ourselves. It's not that there's nothing that we pay money for that we don't desperately need. So you kind of need to start there.
Yeah, for sure. And then the other key concept I was going to mention is one you have in the book as well, which is test assumptions, right? So I think there's a section in there where you talked about when you were doing informally, that everybody told you it was a great idea, right? Yes. Oh yeah, this is perfect. This is exactly what I'm looking for. But as you said, when it came to hitting the buy button, most of those people didn't do it. So you can't really kind of listen to what someone's opinion of your idea is. You have to do exactly what you said. You have to put the buy button out there and get somebody to part with some cash.
Yes.
To prove that the idea is actually worth pursuing. I think.
There's a lot of nuance to this as well, because like I had people writing me testimonials to put on the website about how much they loved the app, and I had analytics in the app, so I knew. I think I was using what's a live chat app? I can't remember what it's called. It's the one that's kind of started the whole like instant live
Lark or something.
Intercom. It was Intercom I was using.
Intercom, right.
So I knew exactly what people were doing in the app. You could log into Intercom. I could see their face and I could see how often they'd logged in, how much they were using it, you know, all that stuff. And the people that were saying they love this thing weren't even using it. And
right.
and these were people that were my friends. Like I'm not having a go at them, but it's just there's a lot of nuance to this sort of stuff. And even some of the people that paid for it weren't using it. And because a lot of the people that paid for it were supporting me. And you know, they probably didn't need it, to be honest. And so you got to think of all that kind of stuff. But I mean, if you're not even asking someone to pay for it, then that's where you're going to fall down every time. Because if you're just listening, everyone's going to tell you it's a great idea. No one's going to tell you it's a bad idea. And I mean, if you've got friends that are entrepreneurs, they might, but just generally, everyone's going to say it's a great idea. But whether they pay for it is another thing. And even if they do pay for it, you probably got to look at why they're paying for it. And then on top of that, you got to figure out how to actually build a sustainable business after they pay for it and make it useful and critical to them afterwards, which is another step. So there's a lot of nuance to it. But I think that the other point of that book was when something works, you kind of know it works and things take off. And that's happened to me probably 3 times over my 14 years as an entrepreneur. And probably 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 ideas. I don't know how many ideas I've launched, but lots. And probably only 3 or 4 times has one of them really taken off. And when it takes off, you know, and you don't ever have to think about the idea again. You just have to make it useful and work out how to run the business and keep growing. But if it's not taking off, then there's a pretty good chance it's not a very good idea for you at that time.
Yeah, fair enough. And one of the other key concepts in the book is that, you know, it's called the 7-day startup for a reason, because if you're trying to start a business, you can draw this process out forever if you wanted to. So the next key concept was execution, which was the 7-day roadmap for everything. So, you know, day 1, we talked about having an idea and how to generate that idea. But day 2 was, you know, coming up with a minimum viable product. So, what would you consider a minimum viable product to get, you know, where do you draw that line between keeping working on your product or getting that pay button up?
Yeah, this is a really, really difficult decision to make, because on one hand, you know, the word viable is in there for a reason. You can't just put something up that doesn't work and expect people to pay for it and expect people to sign up to a subscription for it. That's a minimum product. It's not a viable product. It needs to be something that is valuable enough for someone to pay for. So that can be really tricky, and that's why, you know, things like software apps are really, really hard to do with this kind of methodology. They're not impossible. There are examples out there, where people have been able to do it. And in most cases, they're software developers themselves. In just about all cases, I think. I think that's changing now with all the tools that are available now. But back when I wrote this, I think it was 2013. You pretty much had to be a software developer to build a software app. So that's why a lot of people use this for services because that was the thing that you could start and make viable very quickly. But yeah, I guess it's getting easier and easier. Like I the other week found myself in a position where I'd sort of just realized that I'd done all of this again for our brewery when we launched our supply drop delivery service. And we launched it 7 days after. And I hadn't thought about the concept or the book or anything in any of those days until the seventh day when we launched it. And I just realized I'd done the whole thing again. And it's slightly different because we're inside a company that already has a product and already has customers and all of that stuff. But I did all of the same things. And to make it minimum and viable, I built the thing myself using technology that we were already using. I made sure it worked on mobile so people could use it. It's not particularly sexy. It's not a native app on the App Store yet. It's just a little mobile website. But it works, and we put through orders and it was going to work. There's a lot of manual stuff behind the scenes where people are messaging each other to work out where to deliver the beer and who's going to deliver what and all that kind of stuff. And we're using, Zapier to send orders into Trello and all this kind of stuff, and the drivers with phones. It's very ugly behind the scenes, but to the customer, they go on a nice, neat looking website with its own brand, its own logo. They order the beer, and on the same day, the beer rocks up to their house. So that's, to me, and I built that on WooCommerce using existing plugins and an app wrapper without knowing any code in a couple of days.
Yeah, and I definitely wanted to circle back to that because I think there's less people who are finding themselves in your position at the moment. Because as you mentioned earlier, you're not in that kind of online market. Well, you are online marketing, but you're not kind of in that online business space. You're in a more traditional bricks and mortar. We've got a property in buildings and employees kind of space. But you're finding yourself having to pivot, and you're applying those principles from the 7-day startup to kind of a more traditional bricks and mortar business, which I think a lot of people would find themselves in at the moment. All the restaurants are closed, all the pubs are closed, a lot of the venues and traditional businesses are closed. So they can sit there clutching their pearls and wringing their hands, or they can get off their ass and try and pivot like you just talked about. Yep. So for those people, to just take a side here, for those people who aren't familiar with the rest of that story, is you started a brewery, right? With your mates, 3 mates making beer by the beach. What's better than that? Right? Yeah. So, and that's grown, into quite a successful enterprise with, all the traditional trappings of a normal, quote unquote, normal business. And then when the coronavirus hits, all of a sudden you can't distribute to the restaurants and the pubs and the cafes anymore because they're all closed. You needed to find a way to pivot. And I think that's kind of the main inspiration that I wanted to get across to everyone listening is even if you have a more traditional business and you think that this doesn't apply to you, you may be wrong, and you may need to look for different ways you can pivot. So that pivot that you were talking about, for those who aren't familiar, I know I follow you online. I've been following the story, but you don't have that distribution through restaurants and cafes anymore. So you created that app so that people could order straight from their home, and it goes straight from the brewery to their house, which is a great example of how you can pivot using, kind of an online or kind of a more app or service-based focus.
Yeah, well, we had a few problems to solve, and we did it within a week, but we lost all of our restaurant and bar customers, which was 50% of our. Sorry, it was. Let me see. It was 35% of our wholesale business, and then we lost our on-site tap rooms, which was 25% of our entire business. So, basically overnight, we lost $250,000 revenue a month, and we still have all of the expenses that we had before, and 30 staff members, and all the rest of it. So, we've still got the business selling beer into bottle shops, which is good for as long as that lasts. But losing half of the rest of the business meant we had to do some pretty drastic things, and not only from a customer point of view to make sure we could get them the beer, but also from a staffing point of view, because I don't want to lay off my staff members, and I've got all these sales reps that can't go out into venues. So we sort of combined the two things, came up with our own direct delivery service where the staff members from sales have changed their roles into delivery drivers. And the app and the office staff sort of sit behind, they're administering this thing, and the customer gets the order delivered straight to their door. And yesterday we launched it in Brizzy. I think we did about 70 deliveries yesterday. Last Friday we did another online launch and did about 70 deliveries. So it's not the easiest thing to coordinate when you've got orders coming through the online store, different territories and coverage maps, and you've got 3 different drivers on the road, who some of which can't come back to the brewery because you're in a different city. So yeah, it's quite a challenge. Yesterday was pretty stressful, but yeah, I mean we've managed to, like last week, I think the revenue for the business was down about 14%, and if we did nothing, it could have been down, as much as 50% if we did absolutely nothing. So we're having a big impact on the situation, making it way better than it could have been. It's still not looking good, but it's looking a lot better than it could have been.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of one of the positives I think that's come out of this is watching a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners doing those pivots. And you're like, oh, okay, there's somebody who's not, just not rolling over and giving up. There's someone who's applying a bit of imagination as to how they can keep their business running, and for you, how you can keep your employees and your staff on payroll, and not let's kill this business that you're so fond of and you spent so much time building. I said it, which kind of loops us back to this minimum viable product discussion, which you say in the book, what can you offer as a real product or service? And as you said, it can look very ugly in the background, but let's get it going. Let's get it started. Let's start doing it. And then we'll learn the lessons from that straight away. And you can tidy it up, clean it up.
You end up learning what the big problems are rather than assuming what they might be. And that's the big thing. Like with the delivery thing, we put it up, and without having any clue what was going to happen or how ugly it was going to be, we just made it live and we just started doing it. And it was, once you're dealing with real data and real information, it becomes really, really obvious what the priorities are. So we've made a bunch of changes to it since then. We've changed the time that we deliver. We've changed the amount of deliveries we do. We've changed the process for the drivers. We're looking at storage in Brisbane. We've tweaked the application. We've put some more automation in there. We've set up custom emails that go into Trello with the addresses in there. We're using Google Maps in a different way. We've got automated code on the site that tells people that the delivery run for the day is over and we'll start again tomorrow. This is all stuff we've done in the last 7 days since we launched it that we never would have even thought of before. But we know it's important now because we can see customers using it and where they're falling down and where the problems are. So you're kind of dealing with real information as opposed to dealing with assumptions and potentially just working on the wrong things.
Yeah, for sure. And just maybe on a more positive note, when this is all over and everything goes back to normal and you're distributing to restaurants and pubs, are you still planning on keeping that service?
I like to think so. Yeah. We'll see what happens. I mean, I kind of think people's habits might change for good after this. It might not ever go back to quite the way it was. So if that's the case and people are still happy to buy direct from businesses, then we'd be mad not to keep doing that, because I think if you can have a direct relationship with your customer, then you should have one.
So just to loop back to the 7-day startup methodology there. So, that was a minimum viable product. You bash that out the door. As soon as people hit the pay button, you're onto something. And then you can iterate that, do it as clumsily and manually as at first as necessary. And then you'll learn the lessons when you start doing it. And then you can clean it up afterwards. And like you said, it could be an additional revenue stream for your business for years to come. So, and then the next day 3 and day 4 of the 7-day startup methodology talks about finding a business name and creating a website or a landing page. And I think that's all pretty standard stuff, and you can get that information out of the book. But just some keys on the business name, make it simple, make it easy to say, make it make sense. And I think probably the most important thing is to take it already, which becomes the hard thing most of the time.
Yeah, and I think also with the with the website and with like the whatever the product is, if it's a website or if it's an app or if it's a service that's in a brochure or something, like whatever it is, I would still encourage people to not just put something up that looks shit because you've got the excuse that you've only got one day to do it. Like, be scrappy and figure out a way to put something up that looks really good. Like with this delivery service thing, I had 4 or 5 different names we brainstormed. I wanted something nice and short and fun, so we called it Supply Drop, which is a kind of fun play on words. Our company's called Black Hops, so we like little military names for things. It's a short name. It's pretty fun. I had my designer in the Philippines do 4 or 5 different versions of the logo. It cost me like $30, and I chose one, and that was just overnight. And I did all the custom stuff on the site just with plugins and a little bit of CSS that I Googled to make it look really neat. So it looks like a Black Ops product. The mobile site is black. It's got all of our beers on there. The photos are nice. It's got a nice, neat logo. All of that was achievable in 1 or 2 days. So I think just because you've only got one day doesn't mean you put something up that looks shit. You can still do some pretty good work in a couple of days if you do your research and you actually don't accept something that's not good. And that's a challenge because you don't want to be a perfectionist about everything. The point is to execute. But it doesn't mean you can't make things that are presented well.
Yeah, and I'll put some links in the show notes. It's not hard to find nice templates or nice designers. Like you said, you had a designer on staff, but you can always go and look at Upwork or worse yet, Fiverr or something, and find something that looks good enough or still looks good, still looks professional, and you can do that relatively quickly. Places like Graphic River and those kind of places where you can get stuff. And with all the different website templates and services, if you don't know how to do a WordPress website, it's pretty simple. But if you don't know how to do that, there's stuff like Wix, that has plenty of templates. You can make stuff look nice. You may end up changing it later, but as we're trying to execute, we're trying to iterate and get this done quickly so that we can learn our lessons and build the final product later, if that makes sense.
We'll just keep refining the product. So we built it using our existing online store on WooCommerce, even though what I wanted looked totally different than what the store looks like. It feels totally different. There's downsides to have it built off the same store because it shares a checkout with the rest of the store. So we needed to deal with those problems. But that was the quickest and easiest way to do it. And if the thing takes off, then it might make sense to build our own store. It might make sense to build our own native app. I don't really know, but we can improve it over time, or we can change it easily later on. But now we know whether or not it's working.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't know unless you launch, right? Which is the subtitle of the book, where you don't learn to launch. And then, so I guess that kind of moves us on to day 5. So let's say you've done all those things. We're on day 5, which kind of really talks about the marketing, getting eyeballs to it. So if someone's starting a new business, let's say they're not pivoting like you did, but they're just kind of starting something new, side hustle, or maybe it's going to be a new full-time gig for them. How can they get eyes on this thing? If you build it, they will not come is kind of really what happens on the internet.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, if you get to the point where it is a viable thing, then you can cast the net far and wide with content and with different marketing options and Facebook ads and Google ads and anything else, email lists and anything else. But until you got to probably do the kind of marketing that will get you as close as possible to the people who are most likely to buy. And I mean, that's pretty general advice. I don't know. It depends on what you do, but for us, we could put this in front of people in our ambassador group who love the brewery, who love the beer, who live mostly on the Gold Coast, who come into the tap room, who are absolutely perfect for this service. So we put it in there. I mean, with something like this, we don't even need to market it outside of that. Like we don't even need to put it on our social media or do Facebook ads or anything. We just put one post in the group and built like a little pre-email list and told them about it. And we'd sold the 20 orders in the first day in a couple of hours easily because we're so close to those customers. And so that's the key. And what I did with WP Curve was very similar. I'd built a lot of content before then. I built an email list and I contacted those people who were by far the most likely people to buy from me and said, here's the button you have to click if you want to buy this service. And 10 of them clicked it, and that's why it became a business. So whatever you have to do, I mean, it might be in-person stuff. It just depends on the business and whoever's doing it. But I'd say in this stage, you want to stay away from broad, just random sort of, doing podcast interviews and blog posts and hoping someone might stumble across it. That stuff's for later on or potentially before. But during this period, what you want to do is do whatever you can to get as close as possible to the people who will pay you, and then you have to ask them a direct question about whether or not they want to sign up and pay you for this product or service.
Yeah, for sure. And there's always a group of people that that you can talk to, that you can launch to, whether it's in a Facebook group, whether it's an email list that you've got, whether it's some forum that you're part of or whatever, or existing customers, if you're a brick and mortar business like you guys. There's always somebody you can ask and somebody you can validate the idea against.
Yeah. Just another point on that one. I think another thing I've mentioned in some of my books, I don't, perhaps not in that book, but anyway, one of the books, is that it can be dangerous to scratch your own itch sometimes. Like you hear that advice for entrepreneurs to scratch your own itch because you have a good understanding of the problem, but that can be really dangerous because you're making a lot of assumptions if you're scratching your own itch. And if you're not doing that, and if you know a bunch of people who have this problem, then you already have your answer about who you're going to talk to when you start marketing. So that problem is solved for you. So I would be cautious building a product for yourself. I know that's a little bit counterintuitive because a lot of people say you should do that, but I think it's much easier to build a product where you can see that there are other people out there that have this problem and will pay you for a solution to it.
Well, that's interesting. I agree with that completely. Like, you might be the only person that has that problem. So,
or it may not be a problem for you. I mean, that's what I did with Informly. I thought this analytics thing was a real problem for me, but it wasn't really. I was just excited by line charts, and I still am. I still get reports every week with loads and loads of line charts on them because I like them. Oh, I didn't like them last week, but before last week, I used to like them a lot.
Right.
But yeah, you kind of get in your own head and make your own assumptions about how big this problem is for you. And if I was honest with myself back then, I'd never previously paid for an analytics dashboard. So why would I have thought that this was a big problem for me and big enough to launch a business around it? It kind of doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but then again, you also had a bunch of people saying it was awesome, and they were looking for it too. But
that's why you don't listen to other people.
Exactly right. Well, that dovetails nicely into day 6, which is measures of success. So I think you need to clearly define your measures of success and what that means to you. So and set targets around the metrics that matter. So
yeah,
what would you consider those to be?
Money in the bank.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's really the only metric that matters, and how much more money you have next week than this week, and you can project out a little bit with recurring services. It's a pretty simple equation. You need more customers next week than you have this week, and you need to have less customers leaving than you have joining, and that needs to go on for a long time. And if you get to the point where you can also get more revenue from your existing customers than you got last week, then that's a big outlet for growth as well. But with a recurring business, it's quite simple. You just need a bunch of customers to prove that it's a problem worth solving, and then that number of customers need to grow every week. And once that starts happening, you'll see that exponential growth, which we're all seeing at the moment with this crazy virus. And all my startup friends were nervously looking at those charts when they first started coming out because they know what those charts look like. But I guess now everyone else does too. But yeah, as a business, that's what you want. You want things going up every single week, and it doesn't take long. Like I think I was aiming for 10% monthly growth, I think, at WP Curve, and it was that I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like going from $0 to $1 million revenue in under 2 years, I think, just by growing at 10% a month.
Yeah.
And you can project those numbers out and see if you think you might have a business on your hands.
Yeah, for sure. And then day 7 is launch. So what goes into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's again like the 7-day thing it's kind of a made up thing. It's launch on day 1 if you can, but
yeah.
But yeah, for us, I had a bunch of people I could email, ask them to sign up, and I could have a live landing page. I did in both of those cases that I've talked about have just an email opt-in on the site, which is super simple to do. You can do it with MailChimp basically for free. So I had a bunch of people I could email, and that's all we did. We emailed them, or in the case of the supply drop, we put it in the group and asked them to pay, and that was it. That was launch day.
Awesome. Well, I have kind of one last question for you. Let me round that up by saying, first of all, if you're in this boat and you're looking to start a side hustle or start a new business, or you've got an existing business that you need to pivot, then I would suggest you really go read the book. It's not a long read. You can get it done in a day, easy, and just execute and take action. You can find the book 7-Day Startup on Amazon, 7daystartup.com. DanNorris.me has information about the book as well. Amazon, Audible, any places you normally get a book. But I kind of wanted to circle back. You talked about validating an idea and not scratching your own itch. So how did you decide to go into the beer business when there was already so much competition in the beer business?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. The Black Ops Brewery is not a 7-day startup.
No, I didn't mean to imply that it was, but yeah. I mean, we're talking about validating ideas and finding something to launch, regardless of whether it's 7 days or not. But I was just curious as how obviously beer is a great choice, but it's a crowded market as well. So what was the impetus to start that?
Yeah, well, I actually followed a lot of the same principles, I would say, just at kind of a totally different scale. But we started with one homebrew. We sent it around to our friends, and the response was good. Like within 2 months, we found a brewery we could brew this beer at commercially for only $2,000, which we put in, and we knew we would get that money back as soon as we sold the kegs, and we pre-sold all these kegs. So within a month or two, we had a brand, we had the beer, we'd pre-sold the kegs, and we had a launch party organized. And from that point on, it was momentum the whole time. And, 3.5 years on, we're, a company we were doing well over 1 million liters of beer a year, and 2 breweries, 3 sites, and 30 staff, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. But so I guess the proof is in the results in this case, the same as the last example, where you can sit back and be like, okay, this is a crowded market, it's probably not going to work, or you can just do it and you can see what happens. As it turned out, it wasn't a very crowded market at all. At the time, there wasn't that many up and coming breweries, and there wasn't that many brewery tap rooms. There's still only 5 on the Gold Coast, and we've got 2 of them. So it felt kind of crowded at the time, but it turns out it wasn't. It turns out the industry had a huge amount of growth in it, and we were able to realize that once we started, we could see that there was a real demand for this. And why did we choose beer? Just purely because we thought it would be a fun thing to do. And my mate Eddie wanted to start a bar quite a long time ago, and I just had no interest in doing that. Again, for the reason of only really being interested in a business that could scale and grow. Yeah. And as soon as he mentioned the word brewery, then I was interested, because I knew that there was potential to build a really big, significant business if we did it right.
And you used some of your, those hard learned lessons from the online space, like creating content for kind of a traditional brick and mortar business and doing content marketing, which kind of really hadn't been done all that much before then. And, applying those principles to just a different type of business. And I think with excellent success from what I gather.
Yeah, and that was fun for me too, because I sort of always thought, speaking of a crowded marketplace, that online marketing kind of business guru space is pretty bloody crowded. Yeah. And I never really enjoyed operating that space. I liked the WP Curve business, but I didn't really like because I sort of had the books and the podcast, and I had a membership group and whatnot, which the group itself was good, but I just didn't really like being a kind of online entrepreneur guy. And I always thought it would be way better to just use those skills in a traditional business. And yeah, I think that's been really good for us, because it just meant we had a bit of an edge, and also meant I can keep my brain occupied with books and podcasts and blog posts and things for the brewery, as opposed to just kind of still writing about online marketing stuff, which I was getting a bit bored talking about.
Yeah, and it does tend to kind of feel dirty after a while,
Yeah.
to be honest. And if you want to learn more about content marketing, Dan's also got a book called Content Machine, which is a great read for that as well. So, Dan, I really want to thank you for coming on, sharing your story about, how to create a business quickly and how to get some money coming in if those people out there who are listening are a little bit desperate and a little bit wondering where the next kind of paychecks come, where the next grocery bill is going to come from, even if they do have a traditional kind of brick and mortar business like a brewery, for example. Really generous with your time, and I do appreciate it. Any kind of parting comments? Anybody out there who might be feeling a little bit desperate at the moment?
No, I mean, hopefully some of this has been useful. But yeah, I'm around the place. You can email me or message me on Facebook if you want any tips or advice on anything, and I'm always happy to help. I'm sort of a bit out of it these days with the online marketing and the tech stuff because I've been spending so long running a traditional manufacturing business. But if I can help with contacts and with ideas, I'm always generally happy to help people. So yeah, I'm happy to offer that, and I hope this has been useful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and all the best of luck with the supply drop.
Yes, thanks, mate. Talk
Cheers.
to you soon.
All right, I would like to thank Dan for joining us and sharing his journey and his experiences. If you want to know more about anything we talked about, you can head over to the show notes at theactivemarketer.com/79, and you'll have all the information there and links to how you can get your hands on the 7-Day Startup. Next week, we're back to a regular weekly schedule with a great guest, Mr. Chris L. Davis. So we'll see you then. In the meantime, get out there and design, automate, and scale your business to the next level. See you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Active Marketer Podcast. You can find the show notes and all the latest marketing automation news over at theactivemarketer.com.